Good morning, everyone, and welcome to everyone that's watching on screen and joining in. We have got a substitute for Councillor Brearley today, which is Councillor McNeil from West Lindsey, and a warm welcome to Councillor Whittington, who is joining for the first time as the representative from South Kesteven. This meeting is being streamed. We have members joining us virtually, and can I ask those members and officers present in the council chamber to ensure they switch the microphones on when speaking, and those viewing remotely will not be able to hear. So we'll go to item 1, which is apologies for absence. Rachel, got any?
Thank you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Brearley from West Lindsey District Council, and we have Councillor McNeil replacing him for this meeting only. We also have apologies from Adi Selby from West Lindsey, and we have Rob Gilliott here in his place.
Thank you, Rachel. And item 2 is declaration of members' interests.
Danny, sorry, it's Mark Whittington. I've got another apology, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes, the SKDC officer representative on the meeting papers is listed as Gary Smith. Gary's now left the employment of South Kesteven District Council, and it is proposed that there's a consultation at the moment. Alan, it's likely that our Deputy Chief Executive Alan Robinson, who's attending this meeting, will be replacing Gary Smith. And in addition to today, we've also got the Assistant Director, Anne-Marie Coulthard, in attendance. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Charlotte?
Hi, yes, thank you. Could I also please add the apologies for Victoria Burgess and Roger Gamber-Jones? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's it. So item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting. I'll just ask if anyone has got any objections to them. Seeing none, that's that. So item 4 is the partner updates. This has been circulated before, containing all the updates. Has anyone got any further items to add on to them? Did you put your hand up, Martin Foster?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. It was just to say as well, as an addition, basically based on the South East Lincolnshire County Partnership, Council Partnership. At the present time, we're working on an envirocrime enforcement team as a joint venture. That's going out to private companies to tender, with the aim that all 3 sovereign councils will then be able to carry out enforcement with a private team in place and tweak those according to our own council needs and requirements. So that's in place, or going to be in place, for the spring of this year. So hopefully all 3 councils will benefit from that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. If you just, when it's nearer the time, if you want to send a bit of a report through, that would be much appreciated.
Will do.
Go on.
No, it's just to say will do.
Yeah, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, can I just ask Martin, you said the enforcement will be in line with the 3 leaders' requirements. If it's involving waste and environmental matters, will that be in line with what we've been discussing in the framework for enforcement that's comes through the waste partnership, so we're all aligned?
Yeah, I think the aims of we've put in a framework together at the moment, or our Assistant Director of Regulatory is putting together a paper. That's been brought to an initial meeting of the portfolio holders concerned in the 3 parties. And we're aiming to look at things like fly tipping, overt cameras, foot patrols. So we're basically working along the principles of keeping things in line with what we've been talking about over the past few meetings anyway.
Sorry, with you not being in the room, I'm trying not to whisper to the chairman. I was just keen to note that we've obviously all been working as one towards a package. You know, we've been looking at fly tipping and looking at externally, and I'm not concerned. I was just wanted to, that reassurance that actually we won't suddenly have a different enforcement regime in 3 councils that's sort of out of step with what everybody else is working towards, and perhaps the portfolio holders might want to respond at some stage to say that they're cognizant of what we're all trying to do across the whole county, not just part of it.
What I can do is we have produced a working paper to go for the tender. I can send that to Danny. I think it's available. I had a word with Christian, our AD, and he said he's quite happy to share with other members. So I can send you the outline of what's being proposed so that the chairman can see that and then feed it back into the group if he feels necessary.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Evans?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm aware of the tender that's going out. It's also an in-house tender as well. The contract was coming to an end, so we were looking at taking on another contractor or the same one, depending, and having more options for education being involved, and so it'll be very much what we've already had in place. Just the councillors across the board wanted to look at different contractors to see which would be the best, really. So I don't think anything of it goes any different to what we're achieving now. We were just adding a bit of extra options to bring to. At the moment, we have 2 separate enforcement, and we have like foot patrol, and it was looking at somebody that could bring them together. So as far as I can see, there's nothing that is any different to what the Lincolnshire County Council are trying to achieve, or the Lincolnshire Waste Partnership. So I think it's just the same as what we've got. It's just it's gone out to tender because the contract's come to an end. So I don't think it's anything more than that, really. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Evans. Like I say, just keep us updated on that one. And that takes on to item 5, which is Environment Act update. Matthew and Mike, I think you're presenting this one.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just thought this was an opportunity to go over some of the main impacts coming out of the Environment Act and how they affect us as a waste partnership. Hopefully there's no new things that I'll be saying, but it's just to kind of pull together those thoughts. In terms of the Environment Act, it sets out a framework covering a variety of environmental issues, gives a framework for lots of things which will interact with each other. But some of the main items that relate to waste are the items about consistency of collections, enhanced producer responsibility, which fortunately goes by EPR for short, and deposit return schemes, DRS for short. And I'll mention all those in just a moment. The stage we're at is that whilst DEFRA have set out the framework in the Environment Act, they've had consultations on some of the details, and we await DEFRA's summary of responses, the responses they received to those consultations, which will hopefully provide a bit more certainty in terms of those final details of how those schemes will all work. Those responses are expected imminently. We don't have a date yet, but there is talk of in the next month or so, hopefully we will see that, including some dates so we know the deadlines we're working towards and the impacts that will come through to us. Next slide, please. So in terms of those three items that I already mentioned, enhanced producer responsibility is basically a way through which packaging producers will be able to help to fund local authority collection and processing of the packaging that they've produced. There is a lot of information that's come out through the consultations DEFRA have done, but unfortunately, until we have final details from DEFRA of how that system will work, how the payments will work, how the charges to the packaging manufacturers will work, it's difficult for us to actually take actions as a partnership. We just need to be aware that that is coming. I think we need to be slightly wary of seeing it as a marvellous new funding stream, because it will be, rather than necessarily covering the actual costs incurred in collecting and processing those materials, it's likely to be based on a formula. So we really don't know at the moment how much money we'll receive, how many of our costs it will cover, and how much other funding we might receive less of as we receive that funding. But it's definitely a watch this space item. But hopefully good news in that it means that producers will be taking some responsibility for the material they're producing and helping to fund the disposal of it at the end, the collection and disposal of it. Deposit return schemes, these are basically, for those who've not come across, hopefully most of you will have done, it's where a consumer will pay a deposit when they buy an item such as a drink, and they will then be able to reclaim that deposit when they return the packaging, the bottle in the case of a drink, for recycling. Again, there's details still to be finalised. There's a scheme in Scotland which will be starting sooner than the English scheme. We don't know yet the final details of the English scheme, and we wait to hear what DEFRA tell us how that will work. The impact on the partnership is likely to be that some materials that we're currently receiving, some packaging that we're currently having to collect and then recycle, will actually go through a completely different system and we won't see it. So that's a fairly major impact on us, but again, we don't know the size of that until we know the size and the details of that scheme. The other item that's coming is consistency of collections. The Environment Act sets out some details over a standard list of things that will have to be collected from all households. Some of our actions in response to that are already underway, such as the separate collection of paper and card in twin stream areas. There are other things on that list though, and that includes garden waste, and there is the implication that garden waste collections will have to become free to the public rather than a charged service. So that's one to keep an eye out for. The other one though, which is the big one as far as I'm concerned, is food waste collections, that it's going to become mandatory for us to collect food waste as a partnership from all households, and for the county council to then process that and recycle that food waste. We have a major project that's already underway, starting as a partnership to look at that. And just to give on the next slide, please, some information about where we're at with food waste. We are, as I say, waiting for the final details again of that from DEFRA, including the final deadline of when those collections will have to be in place. But what the Environment Act does specify is that those collections will have to be weekly, and they'll have to be from all households. It also specifies that that material will have to be collected separately from other materials and recycled or composted. And it looks like that will have to be anaerobic digestion. And the current deadline that DEFRA have been talking about, although it's not a final deadline, currently it looks like the deadline for those collections to be in place is March 2025. So by the end of the 2024-25 financial year. Because this is such a big thing that's coming for all of us as a partnership, it's essential that we have joined up thinking, that we're talking to each other to ensure there are smooth links between the collections that are put in place, how and where they're tipped, and how and where they're processed. So officers through the Strategic Officer Working Group are already in discussion about this, and looking to move forwards with the process. And WCA officers have already indicated that what they urgently need to know from the WDA is what the tipping arrangements are likely to be, where and what type of arrangements will be put in place. And that is the focus of what we as the County Council are working on at the moment. And next slide, please, Rachel. I'll hand over to Mike at that point.
Thank you, Matthew. So good morning, everyone. So to follow on just from Matthew's scene setting, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the progress, some of the action that we're taking at the moment, in particular to food waste, because as Matthew's identified, it is our biggest risk, it is our biggest issue that we need to tackle. So at the moment, just referring to the first slide in front of you, what we've been doing for the last couple of months is looking at modelling the actual waste projections for each waste collection authority. And this is essentially coming up with a tonnage for each district, whereby we can identify where it will need to go, hopefully through our waste transfer station network, which is an existing network of 5, which you're all probably very aware of. So we have been producing Matthew and Anna in my team have been producing the modelling data to give us the confidence that we can handle this and process it before it goes on for final disposal. So the tonnages are looking, I think it's we're fairly confident that we will be able to handle this material through our facilities. However, we might have to do some adaptation to these sites that we've already got. In terms of modelling, the modelling data will then be used for haulage to analyse whether or not the fleet, well, we know we will have to have a different fleet haulage contract to deal with food waste, because it is very different to mixed dry recycler or residual material. So we will have to have a separate fleet haulage service contract. So we need to model that as well, which Matthew has been carrying out that work. And I think we're in a pretty confident position at the moment. Not that we need to start procuring that, but at least we know that it's something that we're kind of gradually ticking off. So once we've modelled the data that we will be, the tonnages that we're collecting and having to move on, we'll have to apply that information to our existing contracts. So where we're taking it out of the energy from waste facility, FCC Environment, who are operating the FW, will have to adapt how they operate to meet the shortfall in food waste, which is currently going for incineration, and also how the plant actually is burning, because it has a different calorific value, and the whole composition is going to change in the residual material. So that's some of the existing services in terms of, I mentioned haulage as well, that we will have to adapt to reflect this whole change. So it's not just producing a new service, it's changing the existing services that we've got as well. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Rachel. So I mentioned the transfer stations that we've got. I think one thing that we have been very keen to do is establish if they are capable of dealing with food waste separately. We're fairly confident at the moment that we do have the capacity, but in terms of engineering and operational requirements, our facilities are not designed purely for food waste. So we've been visiting different authorities around the country to establish what other best practices is taking place with handling food waste, and we are trying to we've started looking at the engineering adaptation in terms of drainage and odour suppression that we might have to do at our 5 transfer stations to allow us to have separate food waste. I think it's fair to say that we will have to have some changes made. We will be having to put in a capital bid to adapt them. I think it's inevitable, but it's something that we're confident that we should be able to achieve in time for 2024, 2025. So that's really our kind of existing network of transfer stations. The other concern that we've had is in the greater Lincoln area. At the moment, we rent a small transfer station in North Highcombe, which has been taking mixed dry recycler and more recently paper and card material. that's a very small facility, and it probably won't cope with separate collections of food, which is coming through on a more constant basis from both North Kesteven and the City of Lincoln. So what we're doing at the moment as well is we're engaging with the private sector to see if there's another facility that we can tie down and secure some capacity in future. If there isn't such a facility, then we will have to consider constructing a new site ourselves, which again, that will be costly, but we need to establish if there is something out there, and if not, we need to kind of look at planning ahead with a design and build ourselves, which could take 2 to 3 years. So that is a significant risk for Greater Lincoln. So it is something that we are focusing on. In terms, just moving on to the third slide, thank you. The focus for us really in waste services has been looking at our existing infrastructure. However, we do need to secure AD disposal. We say AD, we think that anaerobic digestion is going to be the preferred option for treating food waste. It seems to be the tried and tested method, and we do hear of new technologies coming ahead, but we need to have some kind of confidence that what we're going to procure is going to work. So to that end, we are engaging at the moment with the private sector just to establish what is out there and what the aspirations are for different operators. We know there is one facility in the county which has been dealing with food waste successfully for many years. We've also established, just from the recent market engagement, that there are several other potential facilities that we think are looking to secure capacity and looking to secure contracts before they will actually progress with their projects. And one thing we will be doing is further engaging with them and talking to them with a bit more certainty on what could go forward. And this leads on to the next point, which is that we need to be mindful of other authorities being in this same boat. This is going to affect everybody in the country. And to that end, we set up Matthew did an excellent job in setting up a stakeholder group to talk to different neighbouring authorities, everyone essentially on our boundaries, whether they be two-tier or unitary authorities, to establish what they're doing and what their plans are. And it's been a fascinating conversation. I think it's opened up channels that didn't previously exist, and it gives us opportunity in future for any securing kind of shared services and shared opportunities. And in some regards, it does give us the confidence that we're not too far behind the curve, because there's lots of authorities who've said to us, we thought we were in a really bad position, and it's nice to know that we're all essentially in a bit of a bad position, because we're all waiting to see what DEFRA release in terms of detail. But I think we have a certain amount of confidence in that we are trying to progress with this with a lot of seriousness, and we are trying to work closely with district council colleagues as well. So as Matthew's alluded to, it is something that will have to be delivered as a partnership project and not necessarily just as individual organisations. So as Matthew did say, we need to look at disposal locations for the WCAs, and once we've kind of agreed that, we will be looking at the haulage of the material. And just while I mention haulage, this is going to be a significant risk to all the WCAs in securing fleets. And I think one thing that's come out of discussions with other authorities is that they very much feel as kind of uncertain about what the private sector can provide in terms of vehicles. So I think it's something we can't underestimate, the kind of need to secure waste collection vehicles as soon as possible, because everyone is going to be doing this at the same time, and there will be limited supply but a great deal of demand for vehicles. So I think it's something that we need to guarantee and give some kind of confidence with disposal locations to then help each district council procure whatever fleet they need to procure. I think it's something that if we deal with it as a partnership, we should be able to see some very good progress. So that kind of concludes from me. Thank you, Chairman. I'll hand it back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. So, have we got any questions on that? Obviously, Councillor Wright's first. Have we got any more after that? Yeah, so Councillor Wright, whatever.
Thank you, Danny. I've got a few, Mike, so I might as well just get them all out in one go. Because you've opened up something I was going to ask. I mean, I'll start actually with the energy from waste, as you mentioned that, because with regards to us now, you know, as the collection authorities are moving through to separate paper card and better recycling, I did wonder if there was effect both on the capacity of EFW, because there should be less going in, but also if when we start to take food waste out, then my information might now be out of date, but I used to know that the garden waste was actually, I think we call it hedge dried or hedge blown, and that most of that wasn't actually usable commercially for compost because it has to meet a certain European regulation level. So will there be capacity, and what would the calorific value be? Would it be sufficient to put more green waste in to replace the food waste as that doesn't go into EFW? So that's the EFW one really. With regards to the whole issue of transport, of AD, of getting up to speed in time, there's one with regards to haulage. I think you hit the nail on the head that it's got to be a partnership approach, because we're going to need to have some kind of uniformity as to how we collect this and what type of vehicle. And of course, we're moving at great speed at the moment in the crossover between diesel and electric. So to dip into the market now to buy maybe old-fashioned diesel to find out that electric's available next year, I think is something we need to be aware of, because yes, everybody's going to be moving along this route, but no doubt there'll be some authorities across the country trying to caveat this, that they haven't got the infrastructure in place in time, you know, and they'll get away with it. And I don't want to be the ones that rush in to say we're first and buy vehicles that we actually regret owning 2-3 years down the line. That seems to be false economy. But you've mentioned operators, you've mentioned AD. So two real separate questions on this really is, one, if we're talking to local authorities across the piece and looking at different local authorities in the area and where they are to see if there is some kind of shared service. One, have we been talking to North and North East Lincolnshire, and how far down the line are those discussions? Is it plausible? And the other is with regards to actually AD operation. Are we talking about somebody that's just set up to take food waste to produce electricity? And are you actually talking to some of the major firms out there in the county? I know there's some in my district who are actually looking to become self-sufficient on site and produce their own electricity. And that if we have early days conversations, is there a route to actually telling them that they may have a fuel source that we can provide, which will be mutually beneficial if they make sure that they install the right sort of AD to take both their waste and our waste? Surely that's a quid pro quo possibility there that will reduce everybody's costs, reduce haulage, better environmental credentials, less CO2, all the rest of it. And then I think that's an opportunity I'd like to know is actually being examined to make sure we don't miss the boat on that. Because to me, it's not just about setting AD plants up just purely to produce electricity because we've got a fuel source. There are opportunities, I think, appearing where people are looking to AD as a solution to their own industrial needs. So just those questions, really.
Thank you. I'll start with the last question first. The notice we have, which has been advertised at the moment, is simply, it states it's final disposal. So it opens the door for any type of disposal. It doesn't require it to produce electricity or biofuel. It's simply as broad as it can be at this point to generate interest. And we want to create some kind of innovation and for people to think creatively, different commercial entities to kind of think about doing something different that might suit them in the long run, because what you stated is completely right, but it would need a considerable investment from such an organisation. We're talking millions of pounds to be able to do this, so the payoff would have to be there for them to kind of balance off the cost of the facility and the balance off by the cost of fuel produced. So it's as open as it can be at this point in time. But what I would say is, if you have, and I send this to everyone, if people are aware of companies that may be interested in going down that route, by all means send that information through, and we can make sure that they see the actual notice and they can respond with the questionnaire that's available at the moment, because it's purely an information gathering exercise. It's a prior information notice, so it's to generate interest, and we want as much interest as possible. So that hopefully answers the last question. In terms of the first question regarding EFW throughput, we're not so concerned at the moment with what's going to go through in terms of volume, because we're helping the situation. We have been maximising the amount of throughput going through EFW, and if we can reduce it down, that has whole efficiency implications. But it's, in terms of calorific value, I think it's something that, safe to say, I'm not the expert on how the FW operates. None of us are within waste services. This is why FCC, the operator, are looking at the implications of this, and we're leaving it to their experts. It will be checked by our independent technical specialist, just to make sure that it does actually stack up, it does work properly. So I think we've got confidence that they will make it work. They've done this before in different authorities with different partnerships. So FCC, I think we've got full confidence in what they will do. And I think if there is extra capacity, we always have the ability to pull in more commercial material to the energy from waste plant. So if it's operating with a little bit more headroom to allow private sector waste, then that could be a good payoff in terms of the actual contract. So that's hopefully answers the first question. In terms of the transportation comment, I'm not sure if it was a question or more of a comment, but I think it's something that we're all aware of, that technology is very much changing. But I think we need to be quite pragmatic and maybe not too idealistic, because we're all aware that there is fantastic new technology out there. But ultimately, it's going to come down to what the market allows, what the market can deliver, and what infrastructure is out there. So if you're thinking of electric vehicles, for example, will there be enough available charge points for electric vehicles? There's a lot of issues around battery capacity at the moment worldwide, not just production, but actual efficiency of batteries. I think this is something where we will be led, and you will be led as waste collection authorities, by what is available on the market. Because if we do have a strict requirement to deliver a service by such and such a date, it may not be deliverable if you want a perfect vehicle. But that's something which everyone will be having those discussions with different vehicle providers. In terms of the third question, the comment about the North links and North East links, we have had very good discussions with them. We are, I think they're in quite a different position to the other neighbouring authorities, in that they've got each other as neighbours and ourselves, and don't have anyone on the outside boundary. Whereas when we talk to Leicestershire or Nottinghamshire, we're very conscious that we're just one neighbour for them, and they've got several neighbours around them. So I think North East links and North links in particular are very kind of welcoming of the approach we've made so far, and they do want to even if this doesn't progress with AD, I think they do want to kind of generate more of a relationship with us, and us with them as well, just to help with any other shared service opportunities. So it's not just looking at food waste. I think it's opened the doors to lots of discussions. So we could be talking about haulage contracts, we could be talking about recycling contracts, composting. It's opened up a real kind of worms that we can suddenly dip into and think this is going to be beneficial for both parties. So it's been a good exercise that Matthew's carried out so far. I think that's answered your 4 questions, unless you want to add anything else. Thank you.
It does, thanks. And wormer is a different type of composting. But now I would just like to say on the back of that, because local government obviously is good at doing what it does, but sometimes we come at issues separately. And with regards to the notice of interest and private companies, then I will just make a plea to all the waste teams to make sure they're working with the economic development teams, who sometimes I've got the knowledge that people are looking for things, and it might not always marry up. So there needs to be those discussions, I think, to make sure the economic development teams have got the interests of notice. So when they get these early day conversations going, they can post it out.
Thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Whittington.
Thanks very much, Danny. I've only had this portfolio for about a month, so my apologies if I ask any stupid rookie questions. My concerns are, well, my first concern is really around the cost and the likely cost to district councils. I mean, our Assistant Director, Anne-Marie Coulthard, on the next agenda item will provide an update on our food from our food waste trial, which we're having to stop as long as it's agreed by our full council this afternoon, because of costs going forward. Now, I know our team at SK have done some kind of preliminary costs around what we think it would cost SK to sort of scale up from our current trial, which is covering 4,700 houses, up to covering all the 85,000 houses in SK, with increased revenue costs, plus also if we do have to go out and purchase new vehicles, we'll have capital costs under as well. We'd have to charge depreciation to our revenue, MRP to our revenue, and we seem to think, and this is just fairly rough at the moment, potentially we could be looking at £1.5 to £2 million. Now, quite simply, SK, and I imagine all district councils are in the same boat, couldn't find an extra 1.5 or £2 million. So we would need some funding from the government. Now I know in the consultation they've indicated the new burdens funding might be available, but I think who've been around local government for a while know that the government say, oh, we'll make new burdens funding available and whatever, and the reality is the funding never matches the cost. So I think for me that's a real challenge. I'm not sure how we address that. Allied to that is if they do make declaration of green waste a free service, well, potentially that could have had another, certainly for SK, around another 800k charge into our quite simply, Danny, we haven't got that sort of money. It's actually interesting that yesterday the Commons Public Accounts Committee actually published a report to the effect of, and they were talking about vehicles, but I think it goes across the whole of the net zero agenda. The government have got all these great schemes, but actually so far haven't actually addressed where the funding is going to come for them from. I mean, the report yesterday was talking about electric vehicles and stuff like that, but I think you can extend it over to all of the other implementation of the green agenda. Great that the government wants us to do that, and actually if they ask us to do it, we will do it and we will deliver it. But who's going to pay for it? Because certainly the council taxpayers of South Kesteven can't afford it, and I wouldn't have thought the council taxpayers of any other district in Lincolnshire can afford it. So just some sort of assurance around that, and potentially we talk about vehicles and acquiring vehicles. Well, talking to our team, we kind of know now that if we want to purchase a new freighter to collect food waste, a twin pod freighter, we know the current cost of that roughly is about £225,000, and there's currently a 10 to 11 month lead-in time for that. So at some point in the future, all councils will have to potentially replace all the vast majority of their freighter fleet, which will incur a great cost to them. But if everybody is purchasing at the same time, that lead-in time of 10 to 11 months isn't going to be 10 to 11 months. I suspect it could be quite a few years. So I honestly don't think, if the government wanted us to go live on this in March 25, we should be starting the planning now. But unfortunately, until we actually know the feedback from the consultation that's coming back, what the source of the funding is going to be, it's very, very hard for us to actually make any preparations because there's a lot of uncertainty there. Potentially, yeah, we could go live March 25, but I reckon if it could take 3, 4, 5 years before it's fully implemented across the country. So just some views on that. And I've also then got the concern around the anaerobic digester capacity, and I'm just wondering, just how much capacity potentially could be required. I know we've discussed possible alternatives as well, but I honestly just don't think the capacity is probably out there. In terms of the haulage costs, yes, I think that we do need to take a partnership approach to this, and I think that would be the view of SK that this is something that we need to address together as a partnership. But again, potentially we're going to have increased demand for haulage vehicles. The supply probably won't be quite as elastic as the demand. And Economics 101 tells us the cost will then go up if demand exceeds supply. So potentially we could be looking at really big increases in haulage costs. So again, which will then have an impact upon the revenue position of district councils. So I really think at the moment there's so much uncertainty and so much risk there, and I really don't think the government actually understand it and actually get it. I mean, to implement this across the country could cost 1 billion, 2 billion, who knows? But it's going to be a big cost. And it's certainly a cost the local government hasn't got at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Did you want to pick up on Mike or Matthew? Matthew.
Thank you. I'll try to pick up on some of those. I would say, first of all, if those are your rookie questions, then I look forward to your questions when you've had more time to learn more about this, because clearly you have a very good understanding already of some of the issues. In terms of funding, yes, the term new burdens springs to mind, but as you say, we really don't know how much that will be. It does appear that it will be based on modelling and grouping and saying, okay, as this type of authority within this sort of family grouping, then this is what we believe, the government believe that the costs will be, and therefore this is the funding you'll get, rather than, okay, how much is it actually going to cost you? And if there's a shortfall, then that is going to be difficult for all of us. I think it's something we're going to need to keep going back to government about any opportunities we get. And I know the kind of national bodies that we're part of and the groupings are all lobbying as hard as they can for the funding to actually truly represent the amount of those additional costs. And you're quite right to mention green waste. It's a bugbear of mine that a term that keeps being used about it is making green waste collections free for householders. But as you quite rightly point out, it will have to be funded somehow. And if it's not individual households paying for the service individually, it's going to be everybody paying for it in their tax, either in their national taxation or through council tax. And if we have limits on how much we can raise council tax by, then we could have problems. I don't have any answers to that, I'm afraid, but you've put your finger on some very clear and obvious points there that we need to be aware of. It's going to hit us in a difficult place financially, even though there is this kind of promise of new burdens. I mean, thinking about it, I'm not actually sure whether, because the requirement to collect garden waste from all households coming through the Environment Act would also appear to be a new burden. I don't know whether there'll be new burdens funding for that and how that will work in areas where the collection's already happening but are charged at the moment, and therefore it would be a new burden that you have to do it for free. So there may be something out there that we could get. It's something that I'll need to ask about to see whether there's a feeling that that is likely to be another source of funding. In terms of haulage costs, yes, as always in Lincolnshire, we're in a difficult place because a lot of the parts of the county are so far from anywhere, haulage is going to be a big issue. And as Mike's already said, it's something we're looking at. We're working on the need to get the waste from where it's collected to where it's going to be processed. You also asked about anaerobic digestion capacity. We're looking at modelling across the county at about 20 to 30,000 tonnes of food waste, which is a lot of food waste, but compared to the size of an operating facility, it's not huge. The only facility we're aware of at the moment currently processing food waste in the county, that is the facility that's been processing food waste from the South Kesteven collections, does at least theoretically have capacity for that quantity. But clearly we're exploring other avenues because commercially we don't want to be tied into a single facility. We need to have other options. So we've gone out with the pin notices, as Mike said, to see what's out there, and we're getting good interest from a number of potential operators. I hope that answers those questions for you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. As I say, I'm blessed in that in Anne-Marie Courtauld I've got a great officer who's given me so much stuff over the last month that it's made the learning process very, very easy. So yeah, but no doubt as I sort of go on and learn more, I'll be asking more questions. I mean, I'm an accountant by profession, so for me, I just look at everything in terms of risk and how we manage and mitigate risk, and I can just see so much risk here. And my big fear is that a lot of it at the moment we can't quantify in financial terms, which gives me cause for a great deal of concern. But many thanks for all your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Evans. Councillor Evans, whenever, did you have a question?
Thank you. You've gone very quiet, actually. It's hard to hear you, but yeah, the other councils in the country and in Wales are already successfully collecting separate food waste. So we know it's already been done, it's already been achieved. So I want to know if we can learn from their success and difficulties. So one of my questions is, what interaction has been held with these councils so far? So that's my first question. My other is a comment, really. I think we really need to be mindful of buying vehicles that will be with us for the next 10 years, because I think the public are not going to be impressed if we go and buy diesel and petrol vehicles. And yeah, I think things are changing so fast that I think in a rush to do something which we haven't got enough information on, I think we could sort of, I don't think the public would be impressed with that, really. And so that was really a comment. And also we need to be looking at why we're not doing more closer to home, because I certainly find a lot of the things quite amazing that we're putting rubble in with soil and we're taking it 2 hours there and back to be collected from a contractor up the road. And so I think we should be looking at if we can do more at home, because there's lots of fantastic ideas. And in fact, Wales seems to be quite ahead of us. Cambridge are doing really well. So I think it's perfect opportunity to look at doing things closer to home, cutting down on the mileage, because at the moment I feel some of the contractors, we only have access to one contractor for certain things. So they literally can say what they want us to do. With this new thing coming up, I think we should be saying what we want contractors to do and really getting it right. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. And there is a good chance that the government may provide, if they give free waste, there may be government funding to allow that to take place. So it's a lot of this we're talking about what we don't actually know. So I think we really need to look at making this the best thing we can do, and not just continue with the things that are not working in recycling and contractors and going all over the country. So yeah, so that's a comment. But my question is, what interaction has been held so far with the councils that have been really successful with bringing in the food waste? Because I know it's been out there for years, and I know areas collect it separately. So what have they been able to tell us about what is working and what it isn't? And just one request, each time I've come to this meeting, I've got the agenda sent to me 5 minutes before the meeting, and I'd really like it sooner, because I really like to sit, and I might spend a whole week going through the agenda, and I maybe wouldn't have to ask these questions. So I do think 5 minutes before a meeting, when I can't open it on my laptop, has made me feel like I would prefer to be more prepared, really. So yeah, so just to come back on the question about interaction with the councils that are successfully collecting food waste at the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Mike, did you want to answer a couple of comments or questions?
Yes, thank you. In terms of interaction, as I've stated, Matthew set up a really useful stakeholder group with neighbouring authorities, but also through his Nordo connections, we've been approaching other authorities around the country. We've had visits to Brent, is it Matthew? Yeah, Brent. We've been to a huge facility in Brent that serves quite a considerable part of London. We've been talking to Gloucestershire about what their experience is, and they're a similar kind of organisational setup to ourselves. And it is, like Councillor Evans said, it is having that ability to learn from others and look at where we will have to adapt our services. So we have been gaining some excellent feedback, and I think it will enable us not just to look at the capital kind of infrastructure that we've got, but how we operate as well. And I'm confident that the information we've got so far will be really useful. In terms of just the other comments, I think Councillor Evans is right in that we do need to look at services closer to home. In the past, we've been a little bit too traditional in how we've procured services. With the procurement that we're doing in future with a dynamic purchasing system, we want a more agile, more socially and environmental conscious contract where we can use local waste management providers at very short notice to keep down carbon footprint of waste disposal. And it's something that we will be implementing, because there's a lot of small scale operators out there that we don't contract with because some of our procurement exercises have been too onerous and too risk averse. And I think we need to kind of try and address that, and it is something that we are addressing. And then in terms of vehicles, I think it is going to be a massive issue for everybody having to procure new vehicles, and I think this is where, as different waste collection authority, I think you need to give serious consideration to having some kind of standardisation and looking at uniformity to give flexibility. And I don't want to say cross-border working, but I think it's something that serious thought needs to be given to, because if we can produce standard vehicles and have an approach which provides resilience in the county, it would help each different collection authority in times of emergencies. And I think it's building in that flexibility, not just the flexibility with immediate collections, but also future-proofing the vehicles so that they are fit for purpose in 10 years' time, and they're not operating on a kind of historical fuel, which is, let's face it, it's going to cost even more, and these vehicles may become obsolete. So I think it's something that I would, and we do encourage through the Strategic Officer Working Group, all the collection authorities to talk closely about different fleets and different types of vehicle, and it's something which is an ongoing agenda item. Thank you.
Did you want to just add something, Matthew?
Thank you,
Thank
Chairman.
you.
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to come in on one of the things you said, Councillor Evans, in terms of collections. Mike's talked about, and we've already talked about the work we're doing with neighbouring waste disposal authorities and nationally waste disposal authorities through Nordo, I would encourage you as waste collection authorities to be looking to engage with other waste collection authorities in terms of how to do successful collections, because you're quite right, there are lots of authorities out there who are doing them successfully. There are lots of lessons to be learned. I think it's we can help, but I think as the County Council and the Waste Disposal Authority, I wouldn't want to tread on your toes by kind of engaging with collection authorities about collections. So I would urge you yourselves, either individually or as a group, to be looking to engage maybe through LARAC or other national bodies with those collection authorities who are successfully doing food waste collections already.
Yes, that's fine. That's lovely. And I already liaise with a lot of different authorities looking at different ways of disposing of things. But it's not always easy to bring it back, and there's not always the appetite for it. But I do feel it helps with the knowing what's going on out there. Thank you.
Thank you. As for the comment about the agenda, it was sent out, but we'll just double check later on that we haven't missed a dot off your email address or something daft like that. Councillor McNeil.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very brief point, because I know I'm only substituting, so I'm not as up to date as other members of this group. The vehicle issue is obviously very important, and the deadline, which Councillor Whittington referred to, I believe, as being for March 2025, but he indicated that that was going to be under consultation at the current time or in due course. Is anyone able to say how firm that deadline is likely to be, or how likely it is to move, either tightened or loosened? Because obviously that will have an effect on how urgently we may need to take some decision making. Thank you.
Thank you. Matthew?
I could try to guess, but it would purely be a guess. I think at the moment we have to work to what DEFRA have said, which was March 2025. That is the last thing that I've heard them saying, and I think we need to work as though that will be the deadline until or unless we hear otherwise.
Thank you, Matthew. Councillor Head.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've listened very carefully to what's been said and trying to get my head around one or two things. And correct me if I'm wrong, the whole basis of the way that we look at our waste collection policy, whether it be for the paper and card, mixed dry recyclables, we're looking at it from an environmental point of view. That's the whole point of this, that we don't want stuff to go to landfill that's going to sit there and break down and create methane and what have you. And the Environment Bill is now tasking, or is going to task us with collecting things differently, which we're already quite a way down the line here with the Waste Partnership. And I did just ask the question of David next to me. At the moment, we don't know, or we're not being tasked on how we have to dispose of the food waste that we're going to be collecting in 2025. That's indeterminate at the moment. And one of the things that has struck me with all of this, as a country, we're supposed to be carbon neutral by 2050. There's a huge amount of embedded carbon likely to go into the mechanisms for collecting separate food waste, for disposing of separate food waste, if you're going to create new facilities and new plants and what have you. At the moment, the food waste that's collected here in Lincolnshire goes to the energy from waste plant, so it's a slightly different slant on it. And I'm just wondering if, when it comes to 2025, if we've just been told we've got to collect it and dispose of it, not into landfill, and then if you haven't got a facility to get rid of it, whether it goes to anaerobic digestion or whether it goes to our energy from waste plant. I'm just wondering what the carbon balance is between the two, because at the moment we are utilising food waste in maybe a slightly different way, in that we're burning it as opposed to putting it into a digester to create an energy source. And I'm just trying to weigh up, because somebody somewhere is going to come along and ask the question. We're all chasing around the countryside, collecting separate food waste. There's going to be new vehicles. If they're battery electric vehicles, there's all the embedded carbon that goes into that with what we're doing. And I just wondered, has anybody sat down? Have we thought about that as collection and disposal authorities? Exactly what's going into this? The cost, yes, we're all aware of the cost of it in terms of financial terms, but where does it balance out in terms of carbon cost and helping us to achieve our 2050 national goal in terms of that? And the other question that I would put, not to us as collection and disposal authority, I would put that back to national government. There has to be an education process. We've gone through an education process here in Boston, North Kesteven, and now going into West Lindsey, of educating our residents on how to recycle and to reduce the amount of recycling. That has to come into it as well. It's not giving ourselves a pat on the back that we can collect 30,000 tonnes of food waste. And I think now where supermarkets and the food industry is looking at the use by date, is giving everything the sniff test now. You can have something in your fridge and you don't throw it out because the date tells you to throw it out. The whole dynamic is beginning to change. Economic situation is changing. To me at the moment, it's very indeterminate. The government has put this out there and we've been tasked to do something, and I just wouldn't want to be running off the edge of the cliff like the lemming, because to me, there's a lot of unknowns at the moment. Thank you.
Matthew, did you want to pick up on that?
Thank you. Yes, to start from the end of your point and come back to the beginning, I think it's very true, and I've been very keen over the years to try to look at the true environmental impact of what we're doing with any material. And I think the kind of recycling is good mantra has helped and has made a fantastic difference over the years, but actually it's better not to produce that waste in the first place. And actually there is a case for it might be better to send something to energy from waste locally rather than to China to recycle it. And I'd be keen to explore and look at that, and we're trying to bring that through in seeking to measure our overall carbon footprint. In terms of the specifics of the food waste, the legislation does say that, as well as specifying the materials that have to be collected separately, including food waste collected separately to other materials, that it has to be recycled, and our energy from waste is classed as recovery rather than recycling, and therefore that's not an option for us once we are collecting it separately. Whether it's, if you did an overall analysis, if we did end up sending the food out of county for anaerobic digestion, we might have been better keeping it in county and sending it to energy from waste, but that wouldn't be an option that's open to us.
Thank you, Matthew. No, so seeing no one else, we'll thank everyone for the comments on that one. We'll go on to item 6, which is a South Kesteven food waste trial update. I see it was covered on the partner update session earlier, but I don't know if Mark or is it Anne-Marie that's picking this one up?
Thanks. Yes. Thanks, Danny. The background to this is obviously that for the last 4 years, SK have been doing the food waste trial. First 2 years were sort of funded by the county council. For the last 2 years, SK have funded it because I think the thinking was at the time that hopefully by now we would be in the situation of rolling out food waste across the whole country. So our trial period would run into the sort of developments of the national strategy. But obviously that's now 3 years away. And SK, we've got some considerable issues now in that we can no longer afford to fund the revenue costs of the scheme. plus the 2 vehicles that we acquired second-hand 4 years ago because we didn't want to sort of commit to getting new vehicles. They're now at the end of their economic life and are costing vast sums of money to repair back on the road. So that's the background, and I'll pass over to Anne-Marie Coulthard, our Assistant Director, who will provide a bit more detail. Thanks, Danny.
Yes, everyone. I think you're familiar that this started back in 2018, as Councillor Whittington has said, and I'm sure with your agreement we'll bring you a full report, a closure report on this pending decision of Council this afternoon to suspend this service. But really, in summary, I think we can say that throughout the trial period, it's been very successful. We've had high participation rates of well into over 70% of the households that were included, and that has shown around about 1.5 kilos of food waste a week coming from each household. We've learned a significant number of lessons from that, which we've shared with the partnership, and obviously we'll continue to share that as we all roll out into a future national scheme, particularly around the types of vehicles. We chose pod vehicles, so that was a split vehicle that had half food waste, half other waste separated off, and how those work around the different needs of different areas, whether that be rural or urban. There's quite a significant amount of work, obviously, for districts to do on that. And as we've discussed earlier, aligned to that is the tipping location and how we tip in that location. So yes, working very closely with other districts still, and of course with the LCC as the disposal authority. We will bring you a full summary report pending that decision.
Thank you for that. Matthew, did you?
Sorry, Chairman, can I just come in on that? What I should have said absolutely in response to Councillor Evans' question earlier about learning from authorities that have successfully done food waste collections. I'm very sorry I forgot to mention South Kesteven. I think all our partners should be talking to South Kesteven, who have been demonstrating that you can successfully do food waste collections in Lincolnshire. So I would say that's a good first port of call for learning about how to do them.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew, for that one. So, I don't think that is right. Councillor Baxter, you're a member of the public in this meeting. You're not a committee member, so I'm afraid I can't let you ask a question. Yep, seeing no one else. That takes us on to item number 7, which is the performance measures update. And Matthew again.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As well as the written report, which gives full details and was circulated with the minutes, I thought it would be helpful to just give a very quick run through some of the graphs and what they show. As the partnership have already heard me talk about before, arising from our joint municipal waste management strategy, we have 4 themes we've identified for what we want to measure in terms of how we're performing as a partnership. The first is the waste hierarchy, and this graph shows our performance on the 2 performance indicators we've put in place with regard to the waste hierarchy. The good news is on the bars at the bottom, which is we have said that we want to try to reduce the kilograms per household of waste that we're collecting and handling, waste minimisation being the top of the waste hierarchy. So as I say, the good news is looking at the pink bars, not only has that decreased over the last few years, we're below our target of keeping that at 1,000 kilograms per household per year. The 2021-22 figures are, for obvious reasons, still provisional. They include some estimates for what we think will happen at the end of the year, but it's based on 3/4 of the year of data. It's worth noting that the total quantity per household has gone up compared to last year. Last year, things fell quite dramatically. during the various COVID lockdowns, particularly at household waste sites. Whilst it has picked up, we're still receiving less waste overall from each household as a partnership. The not so good news is in terms of recycling rate. Our recycling rate pre-COVID had started to take a turn for the better, but largely due to that reduced throughput I mentioned at household waste sites, where the recycling rate is normally extremely good, we have seen a fall in our recycling rate, and we're looking at actually being even slightly lower than it was last year, is our forecast for this year. The recycling rate, as I've already alluded to in response to a previous question, recycling rate isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all, but it is a key measure, and it is something we need to be looking at in terms of why our recycling rate has stalled, although that does also seem to be the national picture at the moment. We would be like to be working towards a 50% target for next year, but it does look fairly clear now that we're not going to achieve that. A little bit more detail in the other slides, so if I could have the next slide, please. I can probably just carry on, Rachel, if you can't get the slides, because I've got the slides in front of me. I can go through what I was going to say. And the charts are in the paper that was circulated with the minutes. So in terms of some of the detail of those waste hierarchy themed measures, and particularly recycling rate, there's a chart in the paper that talks about curbside recycling and how that contributes to those overall figures. The news from that is good in terms of quantity of material. We're recycling about the same quantity per household from curbside recyclables. This is overall, so in twin stream areas that includes the paper and card as well as the mixed recyclables. So that overall total recycled is about, there we go. That overall total recycled is about the same in terms of quantity, but the red bar at the top of this year's is smaller than last year's. That's showing that we've got less non-recyclables in those recycling collections, so less contamination, which is one of the things we're trying to achieve, and a little bit more on that in a moment. The not so good news is that the contribution, the top line, the gold line, shows how much that is contributing to our overall recycling rate. It's making less of a percentage contribution, even though it's about the same quantity, because we're actually seeing more non-recyclables coming through, both at curbside and in terms of other locations. So that same tonnage is contributing less to the percentage overall. But it's that rise in non-recyclables that is really hitting our recycling rate this year rather than us recycling less. So if we could go to the next slide, please. There we go. So this is, apologies that there's quite a lot of text on this one, but I thought it was helpful to break down by material and destination what's happening. So in terms of non-recycled waste, so landfill and energy from waste, the overall quantity appears to be increasing, and I think we need to be looking at why that's happening. And as part of that, we're in the process of commissioning some sampling to actually see what's in that non-recyclable waste now. We haven't had that done for a few years, and then we'll be able to start to get a clearer picture of what might actually be happening with that. Because clearly in terms of both in terms of waste minimisation and in terms of our recycling rate, both of those are suffering as we're seeing more non-recycled waste. In terms of curbside recycling, as I've already said, it's similar quantity to what we had last year, which is good. In terms of other recycling and reuse, this is largely through household waste sites. Although we've seen a pickup to a certain extent in throughput at household waste sites, we're still actually seeing lower quantities coming through those sites than pre-COVID. And again, this is something that that the County Council need to be looking at what's happening with that. Although, in some ways, it is a good thing to be receiving less waste. So we don't want to be trying to do the wrong thing by encouraging people to throw away more. But we need to see whether they're throwing it perhaps in their residual bin at home when they could be bringing it and recycling it at the household waste site. In terms of composting, there is a chart showing just composting in the paper, but basically the highlight of that is we're seeing more this year than last year, but the general trend overall seems to be downwards, although that may well change when the government policy comes through and there are more curbside green waste collections or free curbside green waste collections. Overall, what we're seeing is a bit of a return to normal as COVID restrictions have relaxed, as for instance, as people have returned to work in an office, as more people are coming to household waste sites, but we do seem to have a bit of a new normal. We're still seeing lower throughput at household waste sites. I don't know if people are getting out less. It's things we need to now be starting to look at now we're emerging from the restrictions, COVID restrictions nationally. And then to the next slide, please. This one shows in a bit more detail contamination. So this is non-recyclables in the recycling collections. And the good news here is that we have seen a fall both in terms of that as a percentage of the total recyclables collected and in terms of kilograms per household of non-recyclables that are in those recycling collections. It's not a huge change as yet, but what we are seeing in those areas where twin stream collections have been rolled out, along with public engagement and helping people understand the right thing in the right bin, we've seen not only much cleaner paper and card from those separate collections, but we've also seen a reduction of the non-recyclables of the contamination in mixed recyclables. So that's all good news, and we're moving in the right direction on those. And the next page, please, next slide. So this is just a quick update on the other two themes that we're looking at. Theme 3, which is carbon. As I've already alluded to, we're looking to measure the real environmental impact of all that we do in terms of our waste services. A couple of things we're working on at the moment. Work has resumed on assessing which actions could really have the greatest impact on our overall carbon footprint. But in line with the discussions that have already happened, our officer working group colleagues are looking together at the future for sustainably fueled vehicles, whether that be electric, hydrogen, or any of the other options that are out there. That is an ongoing project, and that will help to make a difference to our carbon footprint. The fourth theme is customer friendliness. We're doing a lot of work in terms of customer friendliness. The twin stream rollout includes a lot of public engagement, trying to help people to do the right thing and understand why we're asking them to do what we're asking them to do. We've seen wider engagement through social media videos. If anyone would like to see Rachel and her team, her colleagues, talking about, for instance, recycling in different rooms, then do go online and find those, and we can point you in the right direction. Our recycling panel have been engaging and helping us to understand the best way to communicate with the wider public. And we've also learned a lot from County View's survey questions on people's experiences of recycling. In terms of actually measuring the level of customer friendliness, there's a lot going on, and it has been felt it's a bit early to try to benchmark satisfaction when services are in transition. when we're coming out the back end of COVID and when TrinStream is being rolled out. But that is something that if the partnership would like to pursue, then we can look to move in that direction if there's an appetite for it at the moment. And that's a quick run through what's in the paper. As I say, more details in the paper, but I'm happy to take questions.
Before I go on to Councillor Evans, I'd just like to say about the sampling of the residual waste. I think it's, if it turns out that the sampling of that residual waste, there ends up to be no recycling in it, in reality, the target becomes nearly impossible to hit for the recycling, doesn't it? So I think it will be interesting to see how much recyclable people do put in the black bin. But Councillor Evans?
Well, thank you for that information. I think some of the measurements need to be sort of taken with, there's things missing from it. So basically with the twin recycling, one of the reasons why the contamination dropped was because we left it. We left contaminated bins on the street and they weren't counted in the figures. So there's items that are not in the actual figures. So I feel that it's important that people that are twin cycling will realise that a lot of contamination was left on the street because of the fact that we had a lot of bins. And anybody that's going through the twin recycling process will realise that it is an ongoing process. And the education part is essential, but then I feel you get to a point where after a couple of years doing the education point that people are aware and you've got to look at other options. And also we need to look at the fact that I mean, my figures showed around this area 140% increase in waste that's just left, fly tipping, bags dumped everywhere. So, but the national news has that at 166%. So we've got to look at that there's a 140% increase in fly tipping while we're looking at these figures that are meeting what we're ticking off. So yes, we're saying there's less contamination, but we've got to recognise and be open to the fact that where's the contamination gone? It's on our streets. Also, we've still got issues to be resolved, and issues are bins that cannot go, that are left on the path. So when people have got 3 bins, we literally have blocked off streets in town. People can't use the path because of the bins. So, I mean, I've been looking at underground and things like that, but you've really got to look at how we deal with that sooner, because that's how you get the people on board. Because look at, we've had really good successes with the twin streaming, but it's the non-successes that hit the news. It's the non-successes, they're the people that are upset. So if you look at them sooner, I think, in the process. And also at the moment we're getting complaints because cardboard, some people have more cardboard, but they can only put that amount of cardboard out. That is an issue because, of course, we can't have side waste. We've asked the contractor to look at side waste. They're not interested in side waste. They don't want any. So people are complaining the fact, look, we're giving you recycling and you don't want it. And so, yeah, so looking at ways of making it easier to get more clean cardboard if people want to hand it to the bin men. I understand it can't be at the side of the bin. It can't even be taken if the bin lid is up, even if they've just taken the bin out. So I think there are ways we can get better recycling results, but we have to sort of work with the public a bit more. And I wouldn't recommend putting out a survey early on in your twin streaming, because you will get all the problems, as opposed to later on when people have adjusted to it. And some of the, so I think we've got to look at the fly tipping in line figures with, because the fly tipping is contamination, really. Thank you.
Mike, Matthew, Rachel.
Can I start, just respond to a couple of those questions? In no particular order. In terms of cardboard, if people have an excess amount of cardboard or certain boxes which can't be broken down to fit in their purple lidded bin, there's always the option of taking that material to a household waste recycling centre, which is exactly what the centres are for any kind of bulky items that won't go into a dedicated bin or extra material. That's always the choice that people have. We don't accept it as side waste, because if the material is left out on the street and it becomes wet, it loses its value, and it then doesn't, it can't be recycled in the same way, and essentially becomes contaminated, because paper and card does break down quite easily once it's gone through the wetting and drying process. So it's in an effort to minimise how much material goes through that loss kind of equation. In terms of the left contaminated bins on the street, I was a little bit unsure as to what that referred to, but ultimately there's a responsibility for individuals, for each household, to try and abide by the rules that we set, and sometimes people have done the wrong thing, not maliciously, just through a lack of awareness, which part of Rachel's team is to help those individuals and go around and talk to them and try and point them in the right direction, which has been a great success. It's not a case of just point blankly turning down, rejecting bins. I think we will take a kind of quite collaborative approach to this and try and engage with the public. Ultimately, certain individuals just don't want to abide by the rules, and then that does create a series of issues in itself, which I believe are few and far between. But if material is left out, as Councillor Evans has stated, and it becomes essentially classed as contaminated material, it still appears on the figures because it will just go through a different stream. So it will show up as potential EFW material or potentially landfill material. So as it does with fly tipping goes on the landfill percentages, which no material is off record. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And in terms of education, I think it's something that we have identified, and with the twin stream rollout, it's been such a big success with the engagement that Rachel's done a fantastic job going around and talking to the public. And I think we've identified that we need to be a bit more proactive in how we get the message out, particularly to young people and schools. And Rachel's team have put together some educational information which will be sent out to all schools. Is it just primary or secondary as well? Primary to start with, and then officers will be visiting certain schools just to talk about waste, and it's so high on the agenda. We think that we might actually get a lot of interest for that. So that's something that should be a real positive going forwards. And the last thing I was going to mention was fly tipping, which slightly alluded to earlier. There has been a big increase in the last 2 years, and I think that's kind of led to the development of the Environmental Crime Partnership, and I think it's something that it is a national problem. Government have recognised that it's a national problem. Everyone is seeing the same kind of spike in material that's getting rejected and thrown onto the streets and in the kind of the rural roads. I don't believe that material is being discarded by law-abiding citizens. I don't think that is an argument to say that you need to have household waste recycling centres more open, or you shouldn't introduce certain initiatives to help clean up the actual waste material. I think there's a lot of evidence to show that the increase in fly tipping can be from unscrupulous businesses who are taking material off residents for a small fee and disposing of it through in this kind of indiscriminate method. And I think it's something that different partnerships are wising up to. And I think I saw an article just this week whereby the supposed kind of waste management operator had been caught doing this, they'd received quite heavy fines, but also the residents who've given the material to this company receive fines as well, because we all have a duty of care to guarantee or to ensure that if you are handing material to someone, that company is a reputable company and they're not carrying out this kind of unlawful activity. So the actual residents have received quite heavy fines as well. I think that's something that we need to communicate wider with the public, because if you don't check this out and these companies don't have the correct permits, then you could face enforcement yourself, and it's not an easy option just to hand material over and pay £20 for disposal. It's not realistic. So I think that's as much as I want to say. If anyone else has any further comments.
I'll just come back on a couple of things, if that's okay. One of them is, yes, it's definitely a national problem, but for us, Lincolnshire is way up there with one of the biggest problems in the whole country. So we have to accept that in Lincolnshire, and in parts of Lincolnshire, we need to look at why it's a huge problem. And I was not really referring to commercial criminal activity, although we are aware that people do false licensing, and then people on pensions get a nasty fine because they looked at that license and they couldn't tell the difference, as I wouldn't be able to either. So there are areas that we need to sort of be mindful and support our public that are not trying to break the law and think they're doing the right thing. But the contamination I'm talking about are in town, just literally bags of rubbish. I'm not talking about commercial. I'm talking about people walking along the street in town, having a takeaway, putting it in somebody's blue bin. That blue bin doesn't get emptied. So it's all these things we're looking into. I mean, we've brought in quite a few things in Boston that have been successful, but it's making people aware that these are the issues that are going to come up. Because if we don't say that there's issues that will come up, if we just say, right, it's their fault, it's the person at home, it's the taxpayer's fault, you know, commercial criminals, everybody's against, but we also have to make it easier. And as you know, here, the biggest complaint is how often the tip's closed, and that is an absolute one of the biggest things on the agenda, as you know, whenever you come to a meeting here for the public. So yeah, so we just got to make it easier. And I'm not on about cardboard that's left at the side of the bin overnight. I'm on about cardboard that somebody waits for the bin man coming, carries out the cardboard, and they won't take it because their bin was already full, and they've stayed in specially to pass it. So I think we've got to have some common sense, and we've got to make life easier. And I think if it's easier to get rid of rubbish, there will be. I mean, if I can just bring in here a little advert for something that we brought in, or I brought in, which has been a massive success. Brought in something called Upcycle Sunday. It's actually on this Sunday. First Sunday in every month, the public are allowed to put out items from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. We've got the charities driving around. We've got a link to a free Facebook page. We've got the scrapmen driving around. They have to take it in by 8 o'clock that night. Otherwise, the next day they will be in trouble. We haven't had one complaint. We haven't had any trouble. And it took me a year to bring it in. And that has meant less people having to go to the tip, and lots of letters from people that have been able to furnish their homes. So I think this is a massive success, and this should be shared with other people, so that other councillors are aware in different areas, something that's working really well. And I'll leave you to it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. I'll just bring in Nicole, then Councillor Wright.
Thank you. It was a question directly actually to Councillor Evans. I wonder if she would share with us the evidence that she's referring to, particularly about the household waste recycling centres. If you haven't done so already, it would be really helpful for that to be shared with the local county council, for us to then kind of base our decisions on that evidence. And I'd also particularly be really interested in your assertion of what it's based on, that Lincolnshire is the worst fly tipping area in the country. I have to say I've not heard that before, but I'd be really interested to see the evidence that assertion's been based on.
Right, I'll just come back with that. Not all areas of Lincolnshire are the worst. Certain areas of Lincolnshire have had the highest And that's on national news as well as I say, 140% rate in fly tipping in our figures, but 166% the national on the national news are saying. So I think their figures are higher than ours. So yeah, there's huge areas of Lincolnshire that don't have fly tipping problems, but Boston certainly is one of the highest. And I'm surprised that Lincoln County Council wasn't aware that Boston had this huge issue. But also, Mike Reid, Mr. Reid, he knows that we keep trying to get into meetings, and he knows that every single meeting he comes to, councillors right across, this is their hot topic. This is the thing that they get the most complaints about. And as he knows, we're still waiting for feedback. So yeah, sorry to ask for feedback on here, but yes, that's I'm just going to come back with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to make some comments, and these are directly to Councillor Evans, because some of us have been here for an awful long time trying to build the positive picture of what we're doing with the Waste Recycling Partnership and with the issues that we do face. And of course, as a member, hopefully you can appreciate I can be a little bit more robust than our officers will be politely trying not to be. But I do struggle to understand why, when we're in a publicly streamed meeting, that we talk about things we've heard on the news instead of taking the evidence base that we've gone through for year after year, month after month. And the fact is that there is fly tipping. We should not be using the public as an excuse to cover the criminal behaviour of people that come even out of county and dump it. The vast majority of the fly tipping that we see all the time, and we've gone through the figures, is commercial or it's criminal. And to actually allow that to be, used in a discussion that we're actually blaming our residents for it, then there will be a small amount. There's always going to be some people that do something that other people don't do. But I think it's wrong to sort of bring into the discussion when we're looking at household waste conversations that we sort of merge that with fly tipping, because they're two almost completely separate issues. And we're talking about this as if this is an emerging topic to talk about, and we're fueling this when we talk about these popular conversations. It's only because we allow it. If you take a firm stance in the area, if you get your residents to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, and you take a consistent stance with that, it's amazing that the results, as we've seen in North Kesteven, how quickly people adapted to twin stream recycling, how quickly they realised that this is the way that we deal with it. And we don't see the great outpouring of public grief that there appears to be in other areas, because they know that's the way it is. And another thing with the cardboard, I think if we're going to start talking about evidence, and anybody that comes to a meeting and says that there is some residents have far too much cardboard, make sure that we've taken out of those figures the cottage industries, the people working at home who seem to think it's the duty of the local authority to take their business cardboard away, because I would challenge any residents to say that on a regular basis they've got far too much cardboard and paper to go in, because I'd like to know what it is that they're having delivered to their houses that's generating that amount of cardboard. Because, I mean, I am an Amazon buyer. I'll fully admit that I buy most of my stuff online. That's what I do. And I generate a lot of cardboard, and I've never had a situation where I can't have enough capacity in my bin to take that cardboard. So I would ask that we make sure that we drill through the figures, that we'll actually, when we come to these meetings, we base this all on evidence base, and if there's an issue, it can be looked at, and it can be sorted on an evidence-based issue, not talking about what may or may not appear on the national news, because as somebody that watches everything he says and he goes anywhere near the news, because I know just how it's exploited and made to represent a view that TV presenter or news item wants to be seen, that you cannot trust what you hear on the news. And I don't care if I upset 1 million journalists in the country by saying that. I do not trust what I hear on the news to be an accurate reflection of local government figures. So I think we do need to just be very careful. We're in publicly streamed meetings. We need to be making sure that actually what we're projecting is that the public are doing really well with regards to what we're asking with regards to household waste. We're hearing figures that show that the usage of the household waste recycling centres, the not tips, is actually down, so there is capacity there so there's no excuse for people to say there isn't a way of getting rid of excess waste. And I would just like to make sure that the next time we come to a meeting, that as members, all members have accurate data to hand, and if it shows something different to what we've been discussing, that they've given officers ample time before the meeting to be able to address that, so that we can see where there's blips and where we need to centre and direct our resources to make sure we're all being able to tackle the issues jointly as Lincolnshire Waste Authority, not as individual districts or areas, and that actually the figures reflect what they really are. And I just ask for everybody to do that, because what we don't need now is to be moving backwards after years of moving towards a position where we jointly work together and don't start talking about separate areas all the time.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I think there was Councillor McNeill.
Thank you, Chairman. Always dangerous to let me listen to people's contributions because it provokes me to want to say things. But my first question was actually about the information shared about going out to primary schools with presentations about recycling and whatever and whatever. I just wondered whether there were plans to inform local ward members, both at district, borough or city, and at county council level, that that's happening. Not so much that they want to attend, but just so they're aware, because it will spike interest, and the pest power of children should not be underrated, says a father of 2 boys. The second thing is, it was very interesting what Councillor Evans was saying about the experience in Boston Borough Council. And of course, at West Lindsey, we are looking forward in the next month or so to introducing that purple-lidded bin collection as well. And we received a very impressive and excellent presentation at our recent strategic leaders panel from Rachel Stamp regarding the rollout, and I was very impressed with that, and the questions seemed to be answered. And one of the things that was emphasised there was very much the concern about that rollout and how certain sections of the population are not keen on change, let me put it that way. And of course that needs to be managed, and lessons have been learnt from the rollout there and at the other authority, and we're hoping to ensure that that is taken forward at West Lindsey. But some of the points that Councillor Evans raised appear to be things which seem to be within the control of Boston Borough Council, because, for example, not taking extra cardboard when a householder comes out with dry recyclate would appear to be not an issue for the disposal authority, but the collection authority. So I would suggest he goes back to her officers and speaks with them about how that's taken forward, because I'm sure that if that was to occur at West Lindsey, we would adopt a suitably appropriate and sensitive approach, while also meeting the requirements of this partnership. And then the final thing I wanted to say on fly tipping, we recently at West Lindsey had a consideration about whether or not we were going to introduce a free bulky waste collection service for our residents, and to cut to the chase, we decided not to do it, mainly because the purpose was to reduce fly tipping, but the evidence just wasn't there. The evidence wasn't there that providing householders with free waste collections in that way would reduce fly tipping. It's very correct to say that it is rogues, and it is the rogues we need to target. And indeed, I'll be very interested to see, as was mentioned in the updates provided from North Kesteven District Council, that they will be they've summoned people to court over this issue, and it would be very interesting to see what their experience is going forward. And I would, of course, be very strong to want to do that at West Lindsey, but we must tackle the rogues and the criminals. I appreciate what others have said about individual cases where, say, a takeaway box is discarded into someone's recyclate bin. That should be able to be dealt with appropriately and sensitively, and if it's a persistent problem, also dealt with appropriately. It should not mar the overall objectives and success of the schemes introduced, would be my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McNeill. Did you want to just pick up on a few of them bits, Rachel?
Yeah, thank you. Just in terms of Councillor McNeill's question about the education programme in the schools, certainly we'll be engaging with all the schools. We'll be making sure that the members at each of those authorities are aware of what those packages look like, that they've been finalised and made to look very professional by the communication staff in the last week or two. We've got a lot of people now coming and asking for those, so we need to prioritise the resource of where we can actively get the team out there, but certainly we will make sure all members are aware and have had sight of them and the links to the materials that we've got, and yeah, thank you for their contribution to them.
Thank you, Rachel. Just bringing Nicole and Councillor Head.
Thank you. It was building actually upon the comments that Councillor Wright made. So it's really a plea to remind ourselves, both in this room and on Teams, that this is a public meeting. So when we talk in quite a global way about facts and figures, officers aren't able to do that. Our decisions have to be made on evidence and evidence-based, as Matthew has presented some meticulously detailed graphs that are actual data. So I can imagine for members of the public who will either be reading the meeting minutes or are actually listening in, it could be quite confusing because we're talking in conflicting ways about and contradictory ways about certain aspects of waste collection and waste disposal. So it's just a plea really to remind ourselves that there is an audience. This is about creating an environment that is the best for our residents. And again, if we're going to talk about data or what we feel is happening in our communities, we need to be able to back that up with the evidence so that officers can make decisions based upon that is then approved with the policy of politicians. Thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. Councillor
Head. Thank you very much, Chairman. I have a number of issues. When we looked at the twin stream rollout at North Kesteven, the whole process, you don't just put something out there and hope that it will happen. A lot of hard work goes into this, and a lot of this has to be member-led. We mustn't forget that we are elected members to serve our community, and to serve our community we have to be out there talking to our community, understanding their problems, trying to sort their problems out by whatever means that we can. I've been out on the streets with Rachel and the teams when we started the twin stream rollout, and you pick up people's concerns. Yes, there will always be a small element of people that don't want to for whatever reason or can't comply. And it would be an interesting statistic that we may not have at the moment of the number of bins that get rejected every couple of weeks. How many of those are hardcore rejections, or how many of those are just incidentals? Because if, for example, there were 1,000 bins that were rejected, of those 1,000 bins, there may only be 20 or 30 that are rejected every time. So we have to be careful with the statistics that come forward with that. And I do stress that when this rolls out, and West Lindsey are going to go next, it has to be member-led. The members have to be out there with their communities, seeing what the problems are. And from experience in North Kesteven, we've had a really, really good result. The level of communications, the infographics and things that Rachel has done. We talk about schools. I have one school in my ward. I'm very, very close to that school and talk to them about environmental issues. Unfortunately, they're very, very keen on environmental issues. It sits well with the curriculum. And I think that sits well with most junior schools. Children at that age are very, very keen to learn, and there's a lot of stuff coming through the media about the environment, so that's an easy win at that stage. But I do stress that most of the success from this is the involvement of the members, and if your members are not on board, then you have a problem, and then residents should then hold them to account when we come to 2023. If the members are not performing for their residents, we have a problem. And I did offer before, and I'll offer it again now to West Lindsey when they start this rollout. I'm quite happy to spend a couple of days with them, going around talking to residents and helping that, because that's what we should be doing here as a partnership. We work together. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Head. Do we have any more speakers? So that brings, so the Waste Partnership notes the charts and commentary provided in the waste hierarchy, the contamination, carbon and the customer friendliness. So all those in favour, if you've got cameras on, just raise your hands. Yep, that's fine. And item 8 is the forward plan. That's attached for noting, but is there anything anybody wants adding?
Danny?
Yep.
I know when Anne-Marie was giving her update on food waste, we promised we'd bring a fuller report back. I don't know if Anne-Marie could give an indication potentially when she thinks that could come back to us, that's a final written report. Thanks.
I'm sure we can have something prepared for the next meeting, Councillor Whittington.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Then maybe, Danny, that's something we may consider adding to the next meeting, or thanks.
Yeah, we can add that to the next agenda item at the next meeting. Nicole?
I just wondered if the next part of the rollout of paper and card is not on the forward plan, then should it be for discussion and preparation?
Yep. David?
Yeah, we spend a lot of this meeting talking about the Environment Act. Undoubtedly, there'll be news coming through, so possibly not as detailed this time around, but maybe an update on progress nationally, regionally and locally.
Yeah, we'll add that on as well. That's 3 more. Any more? No. So thank you everyone for attending. That's the end of the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Bye.